Now that we're able to dispatch an action, we're able to pass in a payload. How do we actually update the state of our store? Well, we could use reducers for that. If we go back to the home page and go down to video 11 inside module 3 and click on the documentation, this will send you to the documentation on reducers. So usually there's 3 basic steps on setting up a reducer. The first step is to set up a interface. And this is just your standard interface. Anything that you could do with the interface, you could do here. So you could set a bunch of numbers, booleans, objects, anything like that. And usually you put the interface within the reducers file. That's a common practice, but you don't have to. You can have it anywhere. So you set up your interface. The second step is to set up your initial state. So you add some values to your properties. Like in this case, they have 2 numbers inside their interface, so they're setting them both to 0 as the initial state. But if you have like a property where it's a string, you could set it to null, things like that. And we'll be getting in all of that. So you want to set up your initial state. The third step is to set up your reducer or create your reducer. So they set it to a property name or a variable, the create reducer. They pass in the initial state that they set up, and then they use the NGRX on method, listen to the action that they created. We already created that action. And then they pass back a copy of the new state. They don't actually change the state. They actually return copies. That's the way it's done. And we'll be setting that up soon. So let's generate a reducer file like we did with the action file. If we go down to NGRX schematics and go down to schematics, and let's generate a new reducer file from within the command line. Copy this. And we'll also use a couple flags. The flag that I'm interested in is the // reducers. This will automatically configure it to our index file. And then also we'll skip the test as well. Let's generate our reducer file from the command line. Inside of the command line, paste, and then we'll describe where we want to put it and the name of the new file. So we'll put inside this store like we did before. And then inside of a new folder we haven't created yet called reducers. And then I'll call it the same that we called our action file. So it'll be customer support, and then we'll use our flags API. We'll set that to true. We used that in the last video. And then also skip test, and that'd be equal to true. And then we'll use the reducers. And what's nice about this is it will automatically configure it to our index file. And I'll show you that in a second. So reducers equals, we'll go back a file, and then it's inside the index.ts file. And let me show you this before we actually run the command. So if we go into the store, open up the index file, and by running this command right here, it will automatically configure it to these right here. So it'll automatically add it to the interface, and also it'll automatically add it to our reducers. Close this down, and then open up the command line and add on dry run onto the end, just in case we made any mistakes. Now, if you don't feel like typing all this out, you could always just copy and paste it from the snippets. If we go back to the home page and then go down to snippets, you could just copy and paste right out of here for any of the code that I'm generating within this video. If we go back here now, let's run this command. And I misspelled reducers, so I need to add on an S there. And then it's going to ask you, do you want to use the create function? Sure. So it's going to create as a brand new file called customer support reducer. And it's going to add it within a reducers folder. That's great. And then it's going to automatically configure it to our index file. Let's go ahead and run this, hit up, and remove dry run. And yes again. All right, so there's our brand new reducers file. We'll check that out in a minute. Let's go ahead and open up our index file. And what's nice about running that flag in the command line, it automatically adds this to our app state. And then also it updates our reducers. So that's good. Close this down. Let's open up our reducers file now. And open this. So like I was saying before, there's 3 basic steps, 3 basic parts to setting up your reducers. Like here's our interface. Here's our initial state that we'll set up. And then here's where we actually create the reducer and pass it in. Now we could use the on method to update or get back a copy of the new state from our store. So what are we going to add to our store to get us started? Let's check out our front end. So the first thing we'll start off adding to our store is the user's name. When the user fills out the form, hits send, dispatches an action, what we'll do is we'll save that user's name in the store. Later on, we're going to give them back a message thanking them for filling out the form. So we'll want to store the name of the user in our store. That's what we're working on. If we go back to our reducer now, the first step is to add it to our interface. So I'll call it name, and it's going to be a string. And then now we're getting an error because this is not matching up with our interface. We'll go ahead and add name to this, set the default value to null. Okay, and then that is done. Step 2. Step 3 is create a on method. And the action that we're listening to, and that is called sending customer support message. The second parameter is just a function basically, and we're going to pass in the current state and the action that that we're listening for. And then now we're going to return a object. Like this, if you think about it, is an object. So that's what we are going to return. We're returning a copy of it, basically. So let's return the current state. That's what this means. And then also what changes are we making? And that's going to be the name. And that's going to come from the action.data and name. Exactly like that. So now when we click on that button, it should update the state of our store. Let's save this and let's test this out. Back here in our form, let's open up our developer tools and open up Redux and then enter in a name. Then dispatch our action. So here's our action being dispatched, and we passed in a payload with Joe in it. And then if we click on our current state, we should have a property in there now called name with Joe in it. And if you ever want to see the difference from the previous state to the current state, you can click on the difference button. And before we had a name in there with null, with a value of null, and now it's equal to Joe. And then also keep in mind you have like different charts you can view here. Like you can see the value by using this. And then if you want to see a raw version of it, you can click on that. I usually just keep it on the tree. So we now successfully dispatched an action. We created a reducer that will update our store. So how do we actually get this value Joe and show it to the form? Well, if we check out this diagram, we dispatched an action, and then we created a reducer to update our store from the current state to the new state. Now we'll create a selector to grab that name out of the store and return it to the view, and we'll work on that in the next video.